Great. My name is Caille Millner, and I'm a columnist at the San Francisco Chronicle. And today, I am very excited to introduce Candacy Taylor. She is an award-winning author, photojournalist, and a cultural critic. She's a graduate of San Francisco State University and the California College of the Arts. She's the creator of Counterculture, a text, radio, and visual project about career waitresses across the United States, and the multimedia projects American Roots and By the Horns. Her work has appeared in The New Yorker, The Wall Street Journal, and Photographers Forum. She's received fellowships from the Library of Congress and the Graham Foundation, and the next year she will be doing a fellowship at Harvard to continue this project that she's going to present to you today. So this project is called The Green Book, and the Green Book was a roadside companion for African American travelers during the Jim Crow era. It was about 30 years, and this was the pre-internet era, so traveling as a Black person in America, you didn't necessarily have the proper information without the Green Book. And if you didn't have the proper information, you could get hurt, humiliated, or even killed. So the Green Book was known as the Bible of Black travel. And Taylor is going to tell you more about the Green Book and the work that she's doing to bring this story into the public consciousness. And I also want to mention that when this is over, she's going to be in signing tent number 1 on Addison Street to sign books.
Wow. It's a full house. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Can you hear me? Okay, great. So happy to be here. Thank you for the warm welcome. And, and I'd like to also thank Molly Conway and Donna Galassi from Avalon Books for bringing me out here, and for Melissa Hall. I don't know if you're here, but you were very helpful with information about this conference. And it's exciting to be here to talk about this project. Over the last 18 years, I've been traveling throughout America, documenting history, culture, and racial identity. And for my first book, which was Counterculture, I documented the American diner waitress. I traveled over 26,000 miles, and I interviewed and photographed 59 waitresses in 43 cities. And By the Horns was looked at female bullfighters. And I was interested in the bloodless bullfight and how America has kind of reappropriated it for our consumption, and how women have or have not fit into bull sports, and the cultural and symbolic implications of women not only gaining access, but anchoring an undeniable presence in the industry. And the third project was called American Roots. And this untangled the issue of race, culture, and identity through the lens of hair. And I traveled over 20,000 miles throughout the U.S., looking at interviewing hair salons that were really ethnically specific, African American, Appalachian, Cajun, Dominican, Gullah, Japanese, Orthodox, Jewish, Pakistani, and LGBT communities. And this is a project that I got the grant from the Library of Congress for, so that was exciting. And now, so I've traveled a lot, and Avalon reached out to me and asked if I would do a travel guide on Route 66. And it was the first project that someone actually come to me and said, will you do this? Because my other projects were kind of my idea. And once I started researching this subject, I thought, my gosh, the same story's been told over and over and over again. It's been covered to death by so many authors. It was a travel guide, so it wasn't, it's like, what am I going to say or bring to the table that's different? And there's this enormous amount of nostalgia that's associated with Route 66. And 99% of the people who were writing about Route 66 were white and male. And so, I just thought America's really messy, and they've just simplified this way too much. America's a collection of customs, traditions, values, and belief systems that have been shaped by capitalism, gender, and race. Really, I think that the idea that Route 66 was this kind of vacation destination for the 1950s suburbanite, white, nuclear family, that story had just been told so much, and I wanted to share, kind of the real American story. I wondered, where were the minorities and the women who worked and lived on Route 66? I wanted to be frank about the times we got it right and the times we got it wrong. Especially when it came to race, the Trail of Tears, those kinds of stories on Route 66. I wanted to honor the past and not romanticize it. So I discovered the Green Book while I was doing research. And the Green Book was a travel guide that was published for Black people during Jim Crow. It was published for almost 30 years, from 1936 to 1966. And it was considered the Bible of Black travel. It was published by this man, Victor H. Green, which was why it was called the Green Book. And his guide featured restaurants, hotels, barbershops, beauty salons, taverns, garages, anything, gas stations that were willing to serve Black people. And despite the intimidation and the violence that was experienced by Black travelers on the road, I was struck how this guide, it was just this very kind of simple and practical solution. It was distributed by Esso, which was Exxon today. They were on the right side of history for this. Or a change, yes. And you have to give them credit because there were other gas stations who were not. And they distributed the Green Book. They actually hired Black men to franchise their own garages and their gas stations. They went above and beyond. They had a Black marketing specialist. It's shocking and it's great. Because this is what we were dealing with, in the 1950s. And this is what they encountered, this kind of advertising, this mid-century kind of sanitized vision of, white leisure. And after I learned about the Green Book, I just never could look at Route 66 and this kind of imagery the same way again. So now that I have a book contract and a very modest advance, and the advance was not enough to cover the trip, the research, and the writing. So I contacted the National Park Service because they have a Route 66 corridor preservation program. And I thought, well, my skills should be useful to them somehow. And I called the director. She looked at my work and, she said, have you heard of the Green Book? And I said, oh my God, yes. And she said, we'd love for you to document some of the properties along Route 66, some of these Green Book sites. So I'm going to try and play a video for you now. So we'll see how that goes. It's only 5 minutes, but it's a video that I produced for the National Park Service, and it kind of gives you an overview of everything. So let's see. Route 66. No other road has captured the imagination and the essence of the American spirit. It connected urban and rural America from Chicago to Los Angeles, crossing 8 states and 3 time zones. This national treasure is famous around the world for having its own soundtrack. It has inspired musicians and filmmakers in classic literature and popular culture. It is the most celebrated highway of its time. The Mother Road was an artery that nurtured communities with busy gas stations, motels, and diners. Route 66 symbolized progress, prosperity, freedom, and the American dream. The iconic images of Route 66 are of white middle-class families hitting the road in their Airstream trailers to visit kitschy Americana landmarks. But the experience of driving Route 66 was not the same for everyone. Being Black and traveling Route 66 during the Jim Crow era was potentially life-threatening. It was assumed that the West was more liberated than the South, but in fact, racial segregation was in full force. Blacks couldn't shop, sleep, or eat at most white-owned businesses. Almost half the counties along Route 66 were all white communities. The 1930 census listed these places as sundown towns. Some communities posted signs that blacks had to leave by sundown. To address this problem, Victor H. Green, a black postal worker from Harlem, New York, published the Negro Motorist Green Book from 1936 to 1964. This national roadside companion featured restaurants, hotels, barbershops, beauty salons, taverns, garages, and gas stations that were willing to serve blacks. Green said he wanted to give the Negro traveler information that will keep him from running into difficulties and embarrassments. But it was much more than that. It was an essential road trip companion that provided invaluable and possibly life-saving information. People called it the Bible of black travel. During Jim Crow, black people traveling in the West avoided small towns and aimed to stay in cities, but it was still difficult to find lodging. According to a 1955 newspaper, only 6 of 100 motels in Albuquerque admitted black people. Route 66 mirrored this shameful chapter in American history. It took courage and resolve to be listed as a Green Book property. These business owners who provided food, shelter, and services were taking a stand against racial segregation. Route 66 was decommissioned in 1985, and many of its businesses closed their doors. Research has documented an estimated 350 businesses that were advertised in black traveler guides. Harvey houses also accepted blacks along with modest tourist homes and other businesses. Many have since fallen into disrepair. Less than half are still standing. These sites of refuge represent the struggle and the triumph of finding a warm meal and a safe place to rest. These properties play a critical role in revealing the untold story of the African American experience of travel. More research will shed light on this rich and complex history of Route 66 and the pursuit of the American dream. So that is really where, that started in terms of getting this project done. And I felt like at least, now I need to get some more money because I was really hooked into discovering more about these properties, understanding, the history of who these Green Book property owners were. I got a couple of grants from the Graham Foundation, from the California Humanities. And this year I got 3 fellowships, one which they all start in July, and one is with Harvard, with Henry Louis Gates. And thank you. It was beyond mind-blowing for me. And the Schomburg Center, which is an amazing, they're in New York, fantastic. If you go to their website, they've digitized 21 editions of the Green Book online, so they're a huge, wonderful resource, and I'll be relocating to New York to do research at the Schomburg for this project. So just to give you a sense of really what was happening in 1950, the quote-unquote good old days, this was really what was, going on in terms of segregation. And you can see out of the 8 states that Route 66 went through, from Illinois to California, 6 of them had segregation laws. 3 states, Missouri, Oklahoma, and Texas, were segregation by law. Even if white people wanted to try and do the right thing, it was illegal for anybody to integrate their space. So there was that reality. And then when you went as far west as Arizona, it was still segregation that was legal. And, in California, even though there were no laws on the books, racial discrimination was in full force. And, they had, the beaches were segregated. There was a pool in Pasadena that had, quote-unquote, International Day, where black people could swim on that day, and Latinos and Chinese people, and they waited until the pool was dirty, and that was the day that blacks and people of color could use it. And then the political officials assured the white people, we're going to clean it right after, they use it. So this was a reality that was happening, and there were signs that, like this, that Victor Green saw. And Victor Green was, postal worker in Harlem. He kind of made the guide for himself, really, because he thought, even in Manhattan, there were places that he felt more comfortable than others. And he patterned this guide after there was a Jewish travel guide in the 30s for the Borscht Belt, which was north of New York. So that's how he got the idea. And, although like 6 million people, black people, were escaping the South and escaping the Jim Crow laws, they quickly realized that, in the North, these were the kinds of signs that they saw. And it was, there was the Chicago Tribune, I'm going to read a quote, said, "We should be doing no service to the Negroes if we did not point out that to a very large section of the white population, the presence of a Negro, however well behaved, among white bathers is an irritation. This may be a regrettable fact to the Negroes, but it is nevertheless a fact and must be reckoned with. Under the circumstances, it would seem that the Negroes could make a definite contribution to good race relationship by remaining away from beaches where their presence is resented." And this was written in August 29th, 1925, by the Chicago Tribune. And a year later, 1926, is when Route 66 started. So, this was a reality they were facing. As soon as they moved westward, though, it became even more apparent that there were fewer black people in the West. So the likelihood if something happened, for them running into somebody who looked like them or could be sympathetic to their situation was also, consideration. A lot of people were escaping the Dust Bowl, the Depression. People of all races were having a hard time in the 30s when Route 66 was just underway. So, people were traveling with a lot of, moving their homes, moving their lives. And Route 66 was still, even at that time, it was, if you were heading west, it was like this was the road of dreams. This was, like a shortcut to freedom, really. And it went diagonally right across the country to the promised land of California. So, that was also something that black people were trying to handle too and deal with. But there were plenty of black people who did have money and who were middle class or, who were wealthy, and they were just simply taking a vacation like anybody else. And we know very little about these wealthier black travelers, and that's what I'm hoping to get more research done at Harvard, because it's an underserved study that we still have stories to discover. But even the Coca-Cola, prepare people brought portable toilets, adequate bedding, coolers filled with food and drinks, because even at the Coca-Cola machine, you had to be white to use it. And these were many of the other signs that people saw, and even Nat King Cole, who, immortalized, and he sang the Route 66 anthem, get your kicks on Route 66. He made it famous. And, he said as a boy growing up in the South, he remembers on Route 66, it really wasn't any different. But what the Green Book did was, it offered this whole other world and opportunity for blacks to discover different parts of the country. And even though in Chicago, on Route 66, there were no black listings in the Green Book, most of the Green Book properties were clustered in areas that were traditionally African American, like South Central LA or South, the South side of Chicago. And this was a great department store in Bronzeville, Illinois, and it was incredible because it employed over 200 black people, and this was kind of the place. If you were going to be in Chicago and you were black, the Green Book told you, go down here, and it's, there's opportunity for you to shop and enjoy yourself. Kanzler's Lounge was another place that served blacks, and it was 180 miles from Chicago, so that was the next stop where you could get services if you were black. So you had to plan ahead, but if you made it to Kanzler's, it was a good thing. And, but there are places like the Imperial Hotel in Pontiac, and that was something out of a Norman Rockwell, painting. 18th century brick buildings and beautiful parks, and, but blacks weren't allowed even in the lobby unless they were cleaning it. And despite the fact that we were in a war in the 1940s, World War II, Route 66 became a major kind of primary route to shuttle military supplies and transport personnel for the war. So the 200-mile stretch between Illinois and Missouri was actually, they had to thicken the asphalt to handle all that military traffic. And that's how often Route 66 was used. And it was kind of ironic that we had these black soldiers, fighting the Nazis. And right at home, there was segregation, and they did not share the same quality experience at home. But there was a great place that they could go to, which was Graham's Rib Station. And it was integrated from the beginning, basically, because they had good ribs. And white people are going to enjoy food. Everybody, it's like, yeah, everybody come and serve. It was a really great place. It was a landmark from 1932, and James and Zelma Graham ran it, and they were African American. It was, today, it's unfortunate, this is all that's left. They had an on-site motel court where the black soldiers would stay. And this place was popular with all kinds of people, though. Little Richard stayed here. Pearl Bailey stayed here, and Viceland TV did a piece. I had to go and film with them, and this is what we found. That's all that's left, because they widened the street, so they tore down the restaurant, but this was one of the tourist cabins, and now it's being used by a law firm for their storage shed, and people just have no idea, what the significance of these buildings are. So part of my research and my work is to, work with state and city officials to say, hey, maybe it doesn't need to be on the National Register because that's quite complicated, but we need to value and honor these sites that are still standing. Fantastic Caverns was another Route 66 attraction that was just north of Springfield, Missouri, and it was a drive-through cave, so it had this kind of kitschy element to it. But again, it was also the place where the Ku Klux Klan did their cross burnings. And this is an actual picture of them in that cave. that we found, which was crazy. And, working with the National Park Service, it's been kind of interesting. We don't know this for sure, but it may be true that businesses that had 3 Ks in them, like this one, Cozy Cottage Camp, was code for, the KKK, and this was right in Adrian, Texas, on Route 66. I've reached out to the Southern Poverty Law Center just to see if, because they track hate groups, and, we're trying to get confirmation about this, but it looks like this possibly could be true. And again, going as far west as even San Francisco, I just put this in here because it's San Francisco, the Klan was alive and well, and this was a rally that was a Goldwater. But another place that was really exciting in Tulsa, Oklahoma, was the Greenwood District. And we have somebody from Tulsa here today, so I told her, I said, I have some good news to share about Tulsa. It's complicated, it's not all good, but everything has balance. But one of the worst acts of racial violence did take place here in Greenwood, the Greenwood District, and the 1921 Race Riot. I don't know how many people know about that, but it was really significant. And but this area, the Greenwood District, was known as the Black Wall Street of America. Booker T. Washington was very proud of this. There were just doctors and lawyers and Black elites and educated people who ran businesses here. So it was a great, vibrant community. And just 5 years before the birth of Route 66, there was a race riot. And it was one of the same story. It's not any different. The black kid, he was getting out of an elevator, and he tripped, and to break his fall, he grabbed onto a white woman, and she screamed, and by the end of the day, he had supposedly tried to rape her, and ignited this whole mob, and Tulsa burned. The Greenwood District burned. There was a 16-hour riot, and 35 blocks burned to the ground. 10,000 black people were left homeless. And so all that prosperity that had been built, in this community was gone. But today, we are recognizing this piece of history because a lot of people don't even know about the Tulsa Race Riot. I don't know why that image isn't up, but I'm going to keep going. It's really a monument to the Tulsa Race Riot, and there's a reconciliation park. And it actually has, information and memorabilia about this. And so if you do take Route 66, I recommend going. It's, a really great, informative experience. And this was a threat filling station. The Threat family created this. And it was just, one of those kind of unassuming places where blacks were welcome and they could get gas or get services for their cars. And it is listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1995. So that is also on Route 66 and we're seeing. But, in Edmond, which was not too far, they had right on the 1940s postcard saying, this is a good place to live, no Negroes, at the Royce Cafe, and again, this was on Route 66. The De Anza Motor Lodge, as you can tell from the video, was an incredible place because once you reached Albuquerque, there were really only a few options. And this place was run by a Zuni Indian trader. It was one of those classic, it was built in 1939, and it was a great spot for artisans and people who love Southwestern Indian crafts. And there were 7 buildings built on this site in the Spanish Pueblo revival style. There were 20-foot murals. There's painted by a Zuni artist. And if you go inside, it was going to be demolished. It was so close to being demolished, and it sat empty for a decade. It was going to be torn down for an Albertsons grocery store. but the city purchased it in 2003 and saved it from demolition. I don't know if you remember, it was also filmed in Breaking Bad. When Walt he takes a spare tire out of the trunk of his car and tries to hide the drug money into and his wife is having a baby in the hospital, you know. It all took place in this parking lot, and it was right there at the De Anza. So it's served its time in popular culture as well. And this is Murray's Dude Ranch, which was fabulous. It was like billed as one of the only Negro dude ranches in the world. And it was awesome. It was so great. It's on the edge of the Mojave Desert in the middle of nowhere in California. It made the cover of Ebony. Pearl Bailey actually bought it in 1955, and she ran it for a while. And unfortunately today, it's gone. There's like a concrete slab left. But we do have, photographs and some newspaper articles and stuff, so trying to kind of revive that and bring that back to life, that this place existed. As you can probably tell, I'm really in love with these places. This is a Dunbar lobby in Los Angeles. This was another fabulous place. It was like an unofficial country club for, Duke Ellington, Ella Fitzgerald, Ray Charles. Billie Holiday stayed here. And at the end of Route 66, is Clifton's, which was at the original terminus at 7th and Broadway in Los Angeles. And it's a Depression-era restaurant that served blacks. It was fully integrated. It's a cafeteria style. And, you could get, and you still can get the, like retro desserts here today. It was closed down for years. It reopened last year. And they did a really great job. They kept the essence of what it used to feel like. And it's still, it's downtown LA, which is being gentrified. So there's this hipster element that's, we can't, but they didn't ruin it. So that's the point, is that, you still should go. And it's, there's so much to discover. It's like 5 floors, so it's this whole labyrinth of just, it's an incredible place. You can get a sense of, that's the main dining room, and it was run by a man named Clifford Clinton, and he did have some restaurants in the Bay Area, in San Francisco as well, and he followed what he called the cafeteria golden rule, and on the menu it said, you can pay what you can afford, and he gave away a lot of free food if you couldn't afford it. He grew up with missionary parents. He was the Christian in the true sense of the word. He had seen abject poverty in China and other countries and just thought, how in the world can a country with so much wealth as America let people go hungry? Like, he just could not accept that. And so he had a restaurant, and he made it his mission to feed everybody, and he did. And he stayed in business and stayed open for decades. So it can be done. We need to, just keep hope alive that, there's enough for everyone. And I'm excited too, because the Hotel Shattuck, yay, it's a Green Book site, and I can't tell you, and thank you, Avalon Travel, for putting me up in this, hotel. It's the first one I've actually stayed in, and obviously it's not on Route 66, but it's here, and it should be celebrated, and that's why I included it. So the Claremont also was a Green Book site, and I scouted like 15 properties yesterday, and the California Hotel on San Pablo was also listed in the Green Book. So, oh, my image didn't come up. Anyway, it's these women they look like they've arrived, and it's a 1950s black women. So I just wanted to be able to show you a different, more inclusive side of Route 66. The brand of Route 66 is so weighted down in nostalgia. I think the fabled highway is just suffocating from this idealized past, because even the people who love that nostalgia are kind of sick of it at this point. I think people are yearning for the truth and yearning for something that's real and authentic. And I think essentially, even though, people say, oh, we've come a long way because we don't need the Green Book, and, I would argue that we still have a lot of work to do. This is me at age 7. I have been questioning racial equality since the age of 7. And I remember this clear as day. I was riding in a car with my mother. Grew up in Houston, Texas when I was really young. And there was this prisoner chain gang. All these black men shackled working in a sugarcane field. And I asked my mom, just real innocently, I said, Mom, isn't slavery over? And she said, yes, honey. And I said, well, why are all these black men in chains? Because that's how they were with the prisoner chain gangs, when I was growing up. And she said, well, they're prisoners. And I said, well, why are they all black? And she couldn't answer it. She couldn't explain, institutional racism and systemic racism to a 7-year-old. But I was asking these questions, and I could have handled the answer, I thought. I felt like she'd shortchanged me. But ever since, I was 7, I've been kind of looking at America through these eyes. And I, like I said, even when we've got the Green Book, in 1964 was really the last year it was produced. And Victor H. Green even said, the Civil Rights Bill, we're all good now, everything's going to change, and we don't need this guide anymore, And he died before. Actually, his wife took it over after that for a couple years, but he died. He never really saw that, but in his mind he thought he did a good thing, and it wasn't necessary, this Green Book anymore. But, right after we passed the Civil Rights Bill, we redlined neighborhoods, we shut blacks out of the GI Bill. In 1996, we passed insane legislation. The Clintons did, Bill Clinton did, that were, that have made irreparable damage to the black community. So we have to pressure our, policymakers to change and to do the right thing, because this is still with us. And I argue that even though, mobility was a factor, you couldn't get from A to B without this guide, social mobility is just as devastating and in some ways even more insidious, than it was. Because in this post-Obama period, we believe that, that we don't have to worry about this anymore. And I think it's becoming evident that, we do. We just don't know how to make it different. And I think it starts with policy, and I think it starts with not allowing, the crime bill and stop and frisk and those kinds of things to continue. So, thank you. Thank you so much. So yeah, that was. I just want to open up the floor for discussion. I'd love to hear, if you've had any experience with the Green Book personally or through your families. You can ask me questions about anything, about publishing, whatever. It doesn't have to just be about race. But oh, great, go ahead.
Did you actually see a copy of the Green Book? I did some research a couple of years ago. I had to, I think, go to the California State Library, and I think they sent me some copies of some of the pages, and I saw some of the listings in Oakland. I think I saw the hotel that you mentioned and other places that they made, that were listing. But I couldn't find a copy of it.
Yeah. No, they're very, that's amazing, because if you go into certain libraries in LA, they have 11 editions that, you can actually touch, and they're pretty amazing. They're only about this big, and, they're very special, but even the Smithsonian asked me to find them a copy to purchase. And I spent a year looking. I found people who had them that wouldn't they would loan them a copy, but they couldn't purchase one. And Smithsonian purchased one at auction finally for like $22,500. So if you know anybody, because they're just sitting in people's attics, just rotting away. And, in Black communities where it's like you could actually have this really expensive piece of history that you could, either share or sell or whatever. But like I said, the Schoenberg, if you just want to see them digitized online, if you go to their website, they have a great archive. Go ahead.
I'm curious if you got a sense in the listings in the Green Book, how many were Black-owned businesses and how many were not? It's just a sense because we're still doing all this research. Most of them were Black-owned. But I am also very curious about, the Biltmore. There were a lot of white-owned businesses and major, I'm assuming that the Claremont was owned by white people. I don't know. But there were a lot of major hotels that chose to integrate their space and that took a risk. And so I definitely want to get those stories as well. Like, who are these people who decided to take that risk? But, if I had to estimate, I would say about, 85 to 90% were owned by Blacks. Go ahead.
Do you know if Victor Green called a lot of these businesses or ones that he heard about, or even just looked at other travel guides and called them to find out what their policies were and that, or did he do the traveling himself?
That's a good question. I should have included that in my talk. Actually, Victor Green was really resourceful. And the way that it spread was that he was a postal worker, and it was union, and he talked to all the other postal workers and, said, while you're out there, see if people want to advertise. And that's how it spread. And it went, from, all throughout the country, but even some parts of Mexico and Bermuda and Canada were included. So, yeah, thanks for asking. That's a good question.
I'm just curious, do you have a sense or an idea of how big the print size was per year for the Green Book?
There's so many different numbers I've read. I've read anywhere from, 15,000 to, a lot more than that, but I don't believe that number. So I'm not even going to say it because I don't think it's true. But yeah, it's hard to know how many were actually printed. And again, at Harvard, I really hope to get down to the there's no way to really know, but it was very widely distributed. And there were other Black travel guides as well, but they weren't published for as long. And they didn't have, if you ever do, you should just at least look them up online, because these were, there were articles in there. It was almost like a magazine. It was it wasn't written in this way where, oh my gosh, how horrible is it that we're living in these circumstances? It was very much about, like, we too can be a part of this, of America, of exploring and traveling. And this is how we do it. And it was just a really, it's just a beautiful guide of just showing people where they could go in different places, not because they were excluded, but because this was open to you,
You might have mentioned it in your discussion, but I'm wondering, who published it? Did he publish it himself?
He did.
And
Yeah, he published it himself in Harlem. And he did eventually because they were advertising, they had to pay to be a part of it. It was a great business model. And then I don't know how he got Exxon to distribute it. That would be part of my research. And if he ever got paid, how much he actually made. But they ranged from like a quarter to $1.25. I think in the 60s, it was about $1.25 an issue to buy. So you have your hand all the way back there.
Hi. I'm just wondering, because it was shared so publicly, these listings, especially also in states where it was illegal, but that was also in the book. And just sort of wondering about the safety of those places once the word got out that it was integrated. Do you know, are there any stories of repercussions that these people who took the risks felt? Or, and I'm just saying, it's such a public thing. It's kind of like outing all these businesses.
Well, I mean, it wasn't. Yeah, I hear you. It wasn't public in the sense that unless you were black, you really had no reason to know about it. So it's not, and I'm sure, I don't think, and I think it was actually probably more convenient for, white people to say, oh, who didn't want to integrate. They say, oh, well, at least there's places that they can go, kind of, an attitude. But we definitely know there was a lot of backlash when people integrated their spaces, whether or not they were a Green Book property or a business. The whole process of integration was very tumultuous and difficult, and they had to struggle. But I mean, I don't know any specific Green Book related stories in regard to that, but I'm sure there are some for sure.
Where was it sold?
Where was it sold? It was sold mostly at Exxon or Esso gas stations, and it was word of mouth. And the businesses would carry copies as well. So if you went to a Green Book site, they would have copies to give you if you didn't find that site through the Green Book. So the Green Book properties were also distributors. You were.
Do you happen to know the percentage of black travelers and other races at that time? Or do you plan to include that in your research?
Yeah, again, it's we don't have any firm numbers on that, but it's, like I said, really the idea of black leisure travel is kind of a more recent area of study in academia. In the last 10 years, we've really started to look a little closer at that because there was this assumption that, black people didn't have anything and they didn't have, that they were, and there were a lot of people struggling. But there were some people, if you worked for the railroads or if you could be middle class and be black, and there were plenty. My stepfather grew up in the South, and so he's told me many stories that, there were plenty of middle-class black people, but we haven't really captured those stories yet, but I plan to.
How was it traveling like for other minorities during that time? Did they have any kind of, type of, what are the situations like for, other, Hispanics or Asians or whatever around that time?
Well, it was difficult because, especially for Latinos and for American Indians, because if you were in the Southwest, it was kind of an interesting kind of three-tiered system where, the segregation was, especially in the Southwest, Mexicans could be in a certain area and then blacks could be even further back. Blacks tended to get the worst of the, services. Same thing, when I was doing the hair project in North Carolina, the Lumbee Indians. I did research on Lumbee Indian culture, and they would tell me, you just didn't, there was a pencil test. I don't know if you guys have heard of that. Or if they put a pencil here, they could see if you had kinky hair, that meant that you had African ancestry, and that would determine where you sat. Because if you were Indian, you at least didn't want to be black, because if you were black, you were set all the way up in the rafters, say for, theaters, or you weren't allowed to sit in a particular restaurant. So, Chinese, because of the rail workers in the West, there was a lot of, it's like, it didn't, it was regional in the sense that wherever, there may not have been segregation laws in some places because they didn't have people, so many of other races to deal with, but as soon as, a lot of strike breakers came in, and there were people who were working of a different race that, were attracted to a certain area, then all of a sudden there were laws and rules that, you had to abide by if you were of any color.
Will this information get into the history books?
If I have something to do with it, I hope so. I mean, I'll probably.
And coupled with that, these projects that you're doing here, are your plans to possibly put these exhibits in major museums? Because this is a story that needs to be told.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm actually talking with the Smithsonian. I've had several meetings with them now, and we're having another meeting in September, because there's a site, the Exhibition Traveling Service, Smithsonian does, is interested in traveling my project, but we're just getting the kind of specifics down. I'm also want to develop a virtual reality platform so that at the exhibit, when you walk in, you put on the glasses and you kind of take a 5-minute trip of what it may have felt like to be Black and drive through sundown towns and the sun setting, and how you find a safe place to stay. So there's so many moving parts of this project, and at this point, once I go to the Schaumburg and to Harvard and I come back and I'm going to document, I'm driving out there, so I'm documenting about 300 sites on the way, and there's 350 sites in Manhattan, Green Book sites, because that's where Victor Green, lived, and then 300 on the way back. So, yeah, most of the research will be completed by next year, and then we hope to get a book, an exhibit, and a board game. So keep an eye out for that. Sorry, in the blue, you've been so patient.
I was wondering, the K and KOA, is that for Ku Klux Klan?
No, not that I know of. No. I'd have to do more research, but I really don't think so.
Did Mr. Green do books in other highways, New York to Florida, for example, or New England?
Oh, say that again? Did he do other?
He do books in other routes, New York to Florida or New England or?
It wasn't just I just focused on Route 66 because of the book, but it was a national guide. So, yeah, so it was all over the country.
The Green Book was national.
Yes.
It wasn't just Route 66.
Right.
Okay.
Yes. Thanks first. Go ahead.
I'm curious about other types of lodging, like campsites, for instance. Because I see hotels, but were there places where people could camp? Was that another alternative?
Well, they were also segregated. And I have a picture, but I'm not going to try and find it on this, but where it literally is a campsite and it says Negro area with an arrow. And the National Park Service was also advertised in the Green Book. So there were certain national parks that were open, but you kind of had to know which ones, for sure.
Yeah, since Mr. Green passed away in the 60s, it sounds like, does he have any family that you've been able to connect with about him?
I haven't connected with him personally, but the Schaumburg has made those connections, and so that's part of the time I want to interview them while I'm there. And there's some that have moved, but there's still a few that are in Harlem, I think, still really in Harlem, and that's where his kind of headquarters was, so that's where the Schaumburg is, so I'm going to be in rich territory.
I had one of my students want to research more on this topic this year. We found a children's picture book called Ruth and the Green Book. That was wonderful.
Yeah.
And I can't remember who the author is.
Calvin Ramsey.
And it's wonderful. And it was like, we need more research done for our middle school students and for our high school students, or books so that they can go and understand it. So thank you for your work, because the students are really interested in learning more.
Yeah, Calvin Ramsey's, he's a colleague, and we've been in touch for years now, and his book might get an NAACP award or something. So, and he does tour and talk about, it's so funny, just a quick story. He gave because he talks to kids, so you might want to invite him to your school. And this little girl raised her hand, and because he was like, I'm old enough to remember this. I think he's in his, I don't know how old he is, but he grew up during this time when he remembers discrimination. And so the little girl puts her hand up, and she was like, were dinosaurs around then? Which was so great. Go ahead, were you in the hat?
My name is Langley. I'm the editor of Go Girl, Black Women's Book of Travel and Adventure.
Nice.
I want to commend and
I know.
congratulate you.
Thank you.
On this project. And I have one question and one comment. I wanted to know what was the most challenging part of this project for you and the most satisfying. And I also wanted to say the distribution numbers, when I did my research on this, my understanding that the height of his distribution was averaging about 15,000 a year.
That's what I keep hearing, yeah. Thank you. I know your work. I have looked you up. So the most challenging, well, the most rewarding part, obviously, is just the work. It's an incredible project, and when I had taken on the contract to do this travel guide with Avalon, I thought, oh my God, what have I done? It was so much work, and I just thought, I just couldn't be this poor for this long anymore, and I was really going to stop. It was like kind of a bottom. I was like, if I can't do, because getting paid for content's difficult, and I was like, I know I have skills that should be valuable financially to somebody, and I was like, if this doesn't, I found the Green Book, and I wrote all of these fellowships. I wrote like 13 fellowship applications last year, because I was like, if this does not work, I'm going to medical school. I'm going to do something else. Like, I can't do this anymore. And it was one of those kind of eureka moments where it was like, wow. And then everything opened up, and I was like, and like I said, from the age of 7, this has been something I have been, focused on and cared about passionately. And now that I'm getting so much support in so many different areas for this work, it just feels, just being able to do the work is the most satisfying part of it, honestly. That's a privilege and an honor, and I'm thankful. But the most difficult, the most challenging part, I have to say, is, because I've done all this cultural documentarian work, and I'm a photographer, and I was in diners and in beauty shops or whatever, and even bullfights, but I was somewhat protected in those environments. And I have to say, I'm in the most insane places. A lot of these Green Book properties are clustered in areas that are in Skid Row, for instance, in LA. I carry mace and a stun gun now. I almost got attacked a few times with PBS, actually. PBS NewsHour interviewed me, and we almost got attacked, and it was just, it's crazy. There's an area of Skid Row in downtown LA that looks like something out of Amsterdam in The Wire. And, again, it's just another, but it fuels me in this way that this should not be happening. These communities, these tent cities, the level of poverty is just, it's outrageous. And so, if I'm somehow in some kind of danger, it's like, whatever, I drive, which is one of the most dangerous things, so it's like, when it's my time, it's my time. But yeah, I know this big burly camera guy, when we did the PBS shoot, he's like, I told him I won't even go down here anymore. I feel like, he's scared he's going to get his throat cut. And I'd been going down there by myself for months, and I was like, you're afraid? And it's like this big white guy. But anyway, so that's the most challenging, is just, I have to be very aware and very conscious of, where I go and how I get these stories. I don't know how much more time we have. Yeah, go ahead.
I just had a question about places in the book that you haven't gone that you might be really excited to go to.
I'm excited to go to Harlem, because that was kind of the nexus, of where a lot of that, where it was born, and and as I drive, I found out Bryce Canyon, like the lodge, was a Green Book site. It's like, I'm excited when I find things like that, where, because that's such a beautiful area of the country, and to know that, it was open to everyone, just makes me feel good. So, yeah, and and when I do things like this, I'm like, wow, there's about 30 in San Francisco. I'm going to go scout tomorrow. So it's all an adventure. Go ahead.
Hi. As a follow-up question to what you were saying about going into these towns and these areas that are so impoverished, in your documentation, photo documentation, are you going to do contrasting pictures to document the poverty and what's happening?
Well, I'm going to definitely show what was there and what is there now, if I can find historical data to, but to me, this is not just a historical guide to me. This is really, a continuation of, the story isn't over, right? So, and these buildings are still here. And I think with any civil rights stories, we've, and I think that's why it just gets so kind of pushed back in the past, like that happened back then, and we don't have to worry about that now. And I think it even says something even more poignant when you see some of these buildings that are in these areas that are so impoverished and neglected, that these were once safe havens. These were once vibrant communities that were, beautiful places with all kinds of, and I read all these great society clubs and things that were happening, and, the Black community was so vibrant and involved, and there was, and for what some of these places have become today is just criminal to me. It's criminal, and I just, again, it's just what keeps me going. But if I can present that visually, one thing I do want to do for the exhibit is I'm working on a digital map that's a kind of a GIS layered map that's showing not just the Green Book sites, but sundown towns, current KKK chapters, all the economic and disparities and things that we're dealing with today, to kind of get a visual sense of what does equality really look like, because we definitely don't have it. We didn't have it then, and we don't have it now, but I'm interested in visually how that manifests itself. So at the exhibit, you type in your zip code, and come up, like maybe you grew up in a sundown town, didn't know it. And then you could get a sense of where your community is at now and how it, and what that really looks like. So that's another thing. I don't know how much time we have, but go ahead.
Are you getting many interviews with people who either were business owners on Route 66, Black owners, as well as people who traveled it?
Yeah, it's harder to find some of the people who are still living who ran the Green Book sites during the time they were published, because it's in the 60s. So I find people who were younger who remember, that area. But it's, the Dunbar is a classic place in LA, and they have saved some of their history, and they do have access to some of those people. So I'm giving a talk at the Peterson Museum, which is a big car museum in LA, in November. And my California Humanities grant is to, at least I've captured the stories of people who ran the properties but are no longer living. So I found enough information about them, and you can go to my website, and some of them are on my website. But again, talking to the Green family and people who ran these businesses will be as much as I can get. I would definitely. And if anybody has any connection to the Green Book, or has stories or family members who may have used it, please reach out to me online, because I'd love to archive those.
Sorry, I think this came up for me when you were talking about the Clifton in LA. It strikes me that where we are culturally, just when you think about politics right now, it's a scary time, and I kind of feel like your project is so commendable in that it recognizes something that we've basically ignored. And I was thinking about thanking the places that were a part of this, that are still in existence. I'm wondering if your digital map that you're talking about will have, like, this place still exists, go there and patronize them? That would be something you could filter?
The exhibit will definitely do that, for sure, because I photograph these spaces, because I do think they need to be valued and celebrated for, I even contacted the VP of Exxon. I was like, you guys, I don't know if they even have some Green Books, because they distributed them. It's like, Smithsonian couldn't find any, so Ford also advertised in the Green Book. I think anybody who had anything to do with it should at least know that they were part of this history, and hopefully by just including them in the project, it will bring more attention to them doing the right thing. However, I did reach out to Clifton's, and have received really very little, if any, response from the new owners, in terms of, I don't know if they just are too busy or, whatever, but so it's interesting. I think we should celebrate them, and I think we should honor their place in history, and they should, continue to try and live up to their past, I do. Go ahead.
Well, my question and comment is similar to Pat's one. And so in addition to, with your site, your website that you'll develop, the interactive site, I'm interested in information to know now some of the areas that are still problem areas. Coming from Michigan, I know there's certain communities that I would avoid, knowing that it still has a strong Ku Klux Klan presence. And I drove cross country, moved here a year ago from Michigan to California, and it's still a question that I ask here, wondering, oh, what areas should I be trying to live in, and which areas should I be trying to avoid? And I just wanted to ask you if Idle Wild Michigan is on your list. The Paradise Club was an area that opened in the early 1900s, and that's where all the celebrities would stay and perform.
Yeah, I have not documented all the Michigan properties yet in the Green Book, but it's likely, I don't know. I know that Michigan and Illinois and Missouri had some of the most sundown towns than any other places. So when you see that level of, just exclusion, then you find these pockets where there was vibrant, this is where we can be. This is a safe place. But yeah, I don't know about Michigan. I'm gonna go. Yeah, I'm gonna go. Thank you. All right, so I think, are we done? Yeah, thank you.